Claire Bennett had transferred to Hawthorne Academy just 6 months prior. The move was supposed to be her golden ticket, a full scholarship to one of the most prestigious prep schools in the Northeast, nestled in the marble and mahogany hills of Connecticut. She came from a world of fluorescent lights and second-hand textbooks, where her mother worked double night shifts as a trauma nurse, and excellence wasn't a choice. It was survival. Claire was 18, razor-sharp, and quiet in the way that unsettles people. Her silence wasn't weakness, it was calculation. But to the children of senators, CEOs, and Silicon Valley royalty at Hawthorne, she was a scholarship girl, nothing more. So when the whispers started and the stares hardened, Claire knew she had entered a lion's den. Still, she thought if she kept her head down, her grades up, she'd make it through. Then, one morning in October, they cut her hair, and everything changed. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. That morning had begun like any other. The air was crisp with early fall, and the rising sun cast a gold sheen over the school's neo-Gothic stone facade. Claire arrived early, as she always did, taking the public bus while her classmates pulled up in matte black Teslas and vintage Aston Martins. Her uniform was ironed, her books tightly packed, and her long auburn hair, inherited from an Irish grandmother she barely remembered, was tied neatly into a low ponytail. She headed to the library, escaping the noise and opulence for the steady pace of prep work. She was weeks away from submitting her early applications to Harvard and Yale, and her AP European history paper on post-war power dynamics was nearly done. By the time second period rolled around, Claire had already read 3 chapters and annotated 2. She took her usual seat, front row, center, in Mr. Whitaker's classroom, an old man with a coffee-stained tie and the kind of tenure that made him bulletproof and complacent. As he droned on about the Treaty of Versailles, Claire felt the first tug. Software almost accidental. She didn't turn around. But then came the second, deliberate, sharp. Then a sound, a distinct snip. Her brain registered the noise before her body could react. The soft metallic crunch of scissors slicing through hair. Not a clean salon snip, but something violent, purposeful. The classroom didn't erupt, it inhaled. A hush fell like a curtain, followed by stifled giggles. Claire's hand flew to the back of her head. What she felt wasn't smooth or even, it was ragged, uneven, violated. She turned. Behind her stood Trevor Langford, Hawthorne's golden boy, son of one of the school's top donors, and the quarterback whose face had graced 3 local billboards for his charity work. He held a pair of craft scissors in his manicured hand, and wore the kind of smirk that only the protected can afford. Behind him loomed his entourage, Blake Carr, heir to a pharmaceutical dynasty, Emma Hastings, whose family's fashion brand lined every department store on Fifth Avenue, and Derek Zhao, son of a hedge fund mogul whose net worth spanned continents. Claire looked from their faces to the classroom. Every desk had quietly shifted, repositioned for a better view. Phones had already emerged. This wasn't bullying. It was performance. The scholarship girl, humiliated in 4K. She turned to Mr. Whitaker, who hadn't missed a beat in his lecture. His chalk scratched across the board as if nothing had happened. He didn't even glance in her direction. Claire realized then what she'd suspected since day one. The school didn't just allow this behavior, it insulated it. She stood slowly, her back straight, her hands steady. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, voice even, "I need to report an assault." The chalk snapped in his fingers. The temperature dropped. Trevor's grin flickered, but Claire wasn't finished. "Would you like me to gather the hair from the floor?" she asked, to help clarify the misunderstanding. Or should I leave it there for the police report I'll be filing? The silence was thunderous. You could feel the power shift in the room, the way fear curled at the edges of Trevor's confidence. Claire didn't cry. She didn't run. She didn't plead for justice. She declared war. And in that moment, a girl they'd underestimated, whose worth they tried to shear away like hair, became the spark that would burn their world to the ground. The silence that followed Claire's words, "I need to report an assault," was not the peaceful kind. It was a silence sharpened to a razor's edge. A silence that split the room in two. Before and after. She had not raised her voice. She hadn't shed a tear. But her words, cool and composed, cracked the classroom's gilded illusion of civility like glass under pressure. Mr. Whitaker turned slowly from the chalkboard, his face already folding into the weathered mask of administrative indifference. For 27 years, he'd taught history with the sleepy confidence of a man who never expected his classroom to make any. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and cleared his throat as if that might reset the moment. "I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding," he said, voice tight. "Please, Miss Bennett, return to your seat and we'll speak after class." Claire didn't move, didn't blink. The remains of her ponytail lay scattered around her feet like a field of dry leaves, rich red strands glinting under the fluorescent lights. She reached up again, touching the back of her head. The cut was cruel, rough, 8 inches of her hair gone in one jagged stroke. "A misunderstanding," she repeated, her voice as measured as a courtroom transcript. "Would you like me to collect the hair from the floor to help clarify it?" From the back of the room, Trevor shifted uncomfortably. His smirk was fading. Emma Hastings, still holding her phone, slowly lowered it. The excitement that had lit their eyes only moments before was flickering out, replaced by the dawning realization that something had gone wrong. Terribly wrong. "I will be filing a police report," Claire said. "You may want to begin thinking about your official statement, Mr. Whitaker." The old man blinked. He wasn't used to this kind of student. Hawthorne Academy was built for compliance, not confrontation. Especially not from a girl like Claire, who wore her ambition as armor and refused to bow her head. From somewhere to the left, a gasp escaped one of the students. Maybe it was Aiden from the robotics club, or Lucia from art. It didn't matter, the spell had broken. Claire walked, slow and unhurried, to the teacher's desk. Her boots, thrifted leather, cracked at the edges, echoed with every step across the glossy tile. Trevor still held the scissors. His fingers were white against the dull plastic handles. The boy, who had cut her hair like it was a game, who had laughed with his friends the night before while planning her humiliation, now stood frozen. His face was pale beneath his perfect skin, and the confidence that money had always gifted him was slipping fast. And then Mr. Whitaker made a fatal error. "Claire, let's not make this bigger than it needs to be," he said, flustered. "Boys will be boys, and honestly, perhaps if you weren't so provocative in your academic performance—" The room gasped. Even Trevor looked stunned. Claire didn't flinch. She tilted her head slightly, eyes sharp. "Provocative?" she asked. "Let me make sure I understand you clearly. Are you saying that my academic performance provoked a physical assault, and that it's acceptable because boys will be boys?" The teacher's mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked to Trevor for help. That small gesture, that silent plea for the quarterback to save him, revealed everything. Trevor's father had donated nearly $3 million to the school's new athletics complex. Claire's mother, meanwhile, had begged her bank not to bounce last month's rent. The math wasn't hard to do. Claire turned to the rest of the class. Her chopped hair framed her face like a halo of fire. The morning light slanted through the windows, catching the red streaks in her uneven bob. She looked not like a victim, but like a storm. "I want everyone here to remember this moment," she said. "Remember what you saw. Remember what you heard. Remember who stayed silent and who spoke up. Because I promise you, this isn't over." And then she gathered her books, gently, without rush. She paused by Trevor, meeting his eyes. "Your father is Richard Langford, correct? Chief Executive Officer of Langford Industries. Net worth around $2.4 billion. Hawthorne's biggest donor." Trevor didn't respond. "I just want to make sure I've got the right Richard Langford," she said, voice light but loaded. "When this goes public." "You can't," Trevor said, his voice cracking. "Can't what?" Claire asked, turning slightly. "Can't seek justice? Can't hold people accountable? Can't speak out just because I wasn't born in a mansion? Watch me." She walked out of the classroom, her spine straight as steel. Behind her, the weight of 23 stunned students, one panicked teacher and 4 now terrified conspirators hung in the air like smoke. The hallway security footage would later show Claire walking calmly toward the girls' bathroom, stepping over the sharp divide between childhood and something else. She didn't run. She didn't cry, not once. Inside the bathroom, she faced the mirror. For 90 seconds, she stood in silence, studying the damage. The cut was crude, a mockery of control. But it wasn't about the hair, not really. They had put their hands on her without permission. They had violated her physical autonomy, and they expected her silence to be part of the price she paid for her scholarship. They'd picked the wrong girl. By the time the buds pushed through the soil and the snow finally stopped threatening to return, the name Sarah Monroe no longer belonged to the girl who used to sit silently in the back of the room. She had become something more, an anchor, a voice, a symbol. But she had not asked for it. Even in the glow of recognition, she remained steady, grounded, cautious. The price of being believed, finally, was the knowledge that it could be taken back in a heartbeat. That reputations were fragile. That some scars didn't fade, even when justice leaned in your direction. Still, Sarah walked taller now. There were no more texts from unknown numbers, no whispers as she passed by, no Zach. His transfer had been made official, quietly and without ceremony. Some said his father pulled strings to get him into a private academy. Others believed the district had pressured the family into stepping aside to avoid further controversy. Either way, his absence left a vacuum at Ridgeway High, one filled not with fear, but with something new. Possibility. Stand Strong, the student support group she co-founded with Lauren, had grown beyond expectation. What began with 10 students around a foldable table had blossomed into a formal club with rotating leadership, weekly sessions, and even faculty involvement. Posters lined the halls with hand-drawn slogans. "Your voice matters. You don't have to take it. Stand strong. Stand together." A bulletin board outside the counselor's office became a public message wall. Notes appeared there daily, some scrawled in pencil, others carefully written on bright paper. Messages like, "Thank you, Sarah. I finally told someone. I stood up for a friend today. It felt good. I used to feel invisible. Now I feel seen." Sarah would stop by that board some mornings, just for a second. She'd read the notes, but never add one. Her message had already been written, with action. Her relationship with her mother deepened, too. Angela had begun attending evening PTA meetings, surprising even herself. She'd spoken, trembling, hesitant, at a parent roundtable on school safety, sharing how close their family had come to losing everything over a misunderstood fight in another city. "You think it can't happen to your kid," she said that night, until it does. There was a stillness in the room afterward that words couldn't fill, and that stillness was powerful. Sarah's final semester passed with few incidents. She focused on schoolwork, college applications, and continued martial arts training, not in secret anymore, but in balance. A local studio had offered her a partial scholarship to begin assisting with younger students. The owner, a kind woman named Mrs. Hayashi, had heard her story through the grapevine. "I've seen students fight with anger," she'd told Sarah. "But you fought with control. That's rarer than talent." Sarah had smiled, small, humble, but something inside her had swelled. For once, her strength wasn't a burden. It was purpose. Then came the moment that marked it all. A younger student, barely a freshman, was being teased in the hallway by two older boys. Nothing extreme, just words, a few shoves, the kind of low-level cruelty that rarely got reported but always left a mark. Sarah happened to be passing by. She didn't yell, didn't strike, didn't even raise her voice. She stepped between them. "You done?" she asked the boys calmly. They stared at her. Then they walked away. The freshman looked up at her with wide, grateful eyes. Sarah handed him a Stand Strong flyer and said simply, "Come by after school. We've got a seat for you." He nodded. And in that moment, the entire journey, every move, every bruise, every silence that had screamed louder than words, came full circle. The lesson was simple, but not easy. You don't have to fight to make a stand. But sometimes standing is the fight. And when you do it with grace, with strength, and with others at your side, you don't just protect yourself. You change the world around you. Sarah Monroe didn't set out to be a leader. She just refused to be a victim. And in doing so, she left behind more than a story. She left a blueprint. If Sarah's story moved you, if it reminded you of someone you know, or someone you used to be, don't let the conversation end here. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself or someone else when it wasn't easy? Hit the like button to support stories that speak truth, courage, and quiet resilience. And if you want more powerful content like this, real stories, real strength, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your voice matters, and your presence helps build the kind of community we all deserve. Let's stand strong, together. Back in her chemistry class, Claire sat in her usual seat, alone. The classroom was unusually quiet, and even the teacher, Mrs. Ramirez, kept glancing toward her with uncertain eyes. No one knew what to say. Some avoided her. A few stared like she was a bomb about to go off. She felt none of it. Not the isolation, not the fear. She was past fear. Instead, Claire was replaying the group chat screenshots she had received that morning, from a student she barely knew. Her name was Lena Patel, a sophomore who'd never spoken more than a polite hello in passing. Lena had seen the story go live, recognized the group chat usernames, and forwarded the screenshots anonymously. Claire had already forwarded them to the attorney she'd called earlier, Helena Chen, and to the reporter at the New Haven Tribune, who had been sniffing around Hawthorne's silence for years. The final piece came unexpectedly, and from the last place Claire would have imagined. That afternoon, as she waited for the public bus, a lone figure among a sea of luxury vehicles, a sleek black Cadillac Escalade pulled to the curb. The tinted passenger window rolled down. Inside sat Vivian Carr, Blake's mother, and one of the most powerful members of the school's board. Everything about her radiated old money and precise control. The pearls, the smooth tan leather interior, the scent of some perfume Claire couldn't name but instinctively knew cost more than a month's rent. "Get in," Vivian said, voice low. "Please." Claire didn't move. "I'm not here to threaten you," Vivian added. "I'm here to warn you." After a moment's hesitation, Claire climbed in. The inside of the car was silent, climate-controlled, and cold in more ways than one. "I know what my son did," Vivian said after a long pause. "I know what his friends did. And I know what the school has done to protect boys like them for decades." Claire said nothing. She just waited. Vivian reached into her leather briefcase and pulled out a flash drive. "This has 15 years' worth of internal emails, payment records, and surveillance data," she said. "You'll find evidence of everything: sexual assault cover-ups, grade manipulation, targeting of scholarship students, expulsion threats to silence victims, you name it. My husband thinks he deleted it all. He didn't." Claire stared at the small silver object. It was ordinary in shape, and yet she knew the weight of it was immeasurable. "Why are you giving me this?" she asked finally. Vivian's mask cracked, just a hairline fracture, but enough. "Because I've watched this school break children, and I helped build the machine that did it. My daughter tried to take her own life last year. You didn't know that, did you? She couldn't take the pressure. We sent her to Switzerland to recover, and I told everyone she was studying abroad. I've had enough of the lies." Claire didn't answer. Her fingers curled around the flash drive. "They're going to come after you," Vivian said, voice dropping. "Your scholarship, your mother's job, your safety. But you already know that. I saw you stand up in that classroom, and I realized something. Maybe it's not too late for someone to do the right thing." Claire stepped out of the car when they reached her apartment building, a modest brick structure with flickering hallway lights and uneven pavement. The Escalade idled for a moment before driving away. She looked at the flash drive in her palm and realized this wasn't about a haircut anymore. It wasn't even about her. This was about everyone Hawthorne had silenced. Every scholarship student who had been punished for being excellent. Every girl who had been told to smile and stay quiet. Every poor kid who'd been told that gratitude meant obedience. She went upstairs and locked the door behind her. In the dim kitchen light, her mother sat at the table still in her nurse scrubs, face lined with exhaustion. Claire slid the flash drive across the table. "Mom," she said, "we need to talk." That night, they began cataloging every file: the embezzled funds, the discriminatory expulsion records, the coordinated campaigns against whistleblowers, even medication fraud involving false ADHD diagnoses, an effort to sedate scholarship kids and boost the school's testing numbers. By dawn, they had uploaded backups to 3 secure clouds and delivered the files to both federal authorities and national media. Claire didn't sleep that night. She didn't need to, because she'd finally seen behind the curtain, and she knew the truth. Monsters don't hide under beds. They sit in boardrooms. The sun had barely risen over the rooftops of New Haven when Claire Bennett stepped off the city bus and walked through the iron gates of Hawthorne Academy. Her hair, still uneven from Trevor's assault, framed her face like battle scars. She no longer tried to smooth the jagged ends. Let them see it. Let it remind them what they did and what she was about to do. She moved through the courtyard with calm determination, her backpack heavier than usual. Not because of textbooks, but because of the flash drive. It was tucked into a zippered pocket beside her laptop, and she could feel its weight like a stone against her spine. 15 years of corruption. 15 years of lives destroyed and covered up. The names, the numbers, the proof. It was all in there. Claire wasn't scared. She was ready. She passed by students who looked at her with a mix of awe and discomfort. Some avoided her gaze. Others offered a nod or a whispered, "You okay?" But no one truly understood what she carried. not yet. Her first stop wasn't the office. It was room 204, advanced chemistry, the one place she had always felt safe, until yesterday. She arrived 5 minutes early, as usual, but today the room wasn't empty. Trevor Langford was already there, sitting at her assigned lab station, flanked by 2 of his football teammates, both built like linemen and wearing smug expressions. He leaned back in her seat like he owned the room. "Morning, Claire," he said, voice thick with forced nonchalance. "Thought we could share a desk today. You know, no hard feelings." Claire stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. Behind her, students began filtering in, slowing as they realized what they were walking into. Word had already spread. She had evidence. She was pressing charges. She had turned down a legal bribe. And now Trevor was trying to reclaim territory. His usual playbook: dominate the space, reclaim control, remind everyone of the social order. Too late for that. Mrs. Ramirez entered seconds later, her eyes moving quickly between Claire and Trevor. The tension in the room was so thick it could have been sliced with a scalpel. "Mr. Langford," she said, hesitating. "That's Claire's assigned seat." Trevor didn't move. "Oh, I'm sure she won't mind," he said, flashing the same grin he wore the day he cut her hair. "We're all friends here, right?" The room went still. Mrs. Ramirez looked uncertain, torn between fairness and fear. Claire stepped forward, slowly, methodically. She placed her books down on the edge of the lab table. The slam echoed through the room. She turned to face Trevor. "You're in my seat." Trevor smirked. "Make me move." Claire didn't blink. Instead, she reached into her backpack and pulled out her phone. With a few swift taps, she activated the camera and hit record. She angled it directly at Trevor's face. "For the record," she said clearly, "this is Trevor Langford, who assaulted me yesterday, now attempting to deny me access to my assigned seat in AP Chemistry. Mrs. Ramirez, you are witnessing this, correct?" The teacher's voice was shaky. Yes, I am." "And you've asked him to move?" "I have." Claire turned the camera back to Trevor. His smile was faltering now, his posture stiffened. "You can't just—" "Actually," Claire interrupted, her voice calm as ever. "I can. Your stunt yesterday opened a door called legal documentation. From now on, every word you speak to me is evidence. Every movement, every attempt to intimidate. It all becomes part of the record for the civil suit my attorney is preparing." Blake Carr, sitting a few desks away, muttered, "Dude, maybe we should—" "Shut up," Trevor hissed, but the cracks were showing. Claire kept recording. "You have 10 seconds to move," she said, her tone polite but unshakable. "Then I call my lawyer on speaker and let him explain to the entire class the definition of ongoing harassment under Connecticut law." Trevor didn't respond. 10, 9, Blake was already standing. 8, 7, Trevor shot out of the seat so fast he knocked over a beaker, which shattered on the floor. The glass spread like jagged little stars across the tile. He stormed out, his entourage trailing behind him, heads down. Claire sat down, opened her textbook, and continued class as if nothing had happened. For the first time, the room felt like hers. The incident was uploaded to social media within an hour. A classmate had recorded the entire exchange from the back row. By lunch, it had over 800,000 views on TikTok and had been picked up by 3 local news outlets. Trevor's carefully curated image, the quarterback, the charity volunteer, the golden boy, was beginning to unravel. And Claire hadn't even opened the flash drive yet. She waited until that night. Back home, her mother, still in her nursing scrubs, brewed a pot of strong black coffee while Claire laid out her plan. The kitchen table was cluttered with printed emails, screenshot transcripts, and a legal pad with lists and names written in her sharp, meticulous handwriting. "We can't do this halfway," Claire said. "Not with people like the Langfords. We need backups, multiple locations, off-site storage, scheduled drops." "You've really thought this through," her mother murmured, impressed and concerned. "I've had a long time to think." They worked for hours, uploaded copies to 3 encrypted cloud accounts, sent physical duplicates to journalists and legal contacts. Claire even set up a dead man's switch. If anything happened to her or her mother, everything would go public. By 1 a.m., they were done. Her mother sat back, rubbing her temples. "They're going to come after us." "I know." "Claire, this school has protected monsters for decades. These people, they ruin lives." "Then we make it expensive," Claire replied. "For once, they get to pay." At 7:15 the next morning, Claire walked into the headmaster's office without knocking. Dr. Judith Monroe looked up from her desk with the frosty composure of a woman who'd spent her career outmaneuvering crises. She wore a silk blouse the color of bone and a pearl necklace that looked like it belonged in a museum. "Miss Bennett," she said smoothly, "you've become quite the topic of conversation." "Then, let's make it official," Claire said, placing a small envelope on the desk. "That's a formal request for an internal Title IX investigation, plus a notification that I'll be pursuing civil action. You'll find attachments outlining the pattern of abuse, administrative negligence, and witness corroboration." Monroe didn't touch the envelope. "This is not the proper channel." "No," Claire cut in. "But the proper channels have failed too many students for too many years, so I've opened a few new ones." She leaned forward slightly. "And you may want to check your email. A reporter from the New York Times has some questions about your student discipline records. Seems someone shared a spreadsheet showing how punishment correlates with family income." Dr. Monroe's hand twitched. "You think this is going to make you a hero?" she asked coldly. "You think anyone's going to thank you for dragging this school's name through the mud?" "No," Claire said simply. "I'm not looking for thanks. I'm looking for justice." As she turned to leave, Dr. Monroe called after her. "This will destroy your chances. You're gambling your future." Claire paused in the doorway. "Then, it's a good thing I stopped playing by your rules." By that afternoon, reporters were parked at the school gates. Alumni were posting support messages. Former students, some from 10-15 years ago, began emailing Claire, sharing their stories, offering documentation, offering help. Trevor Langford, meanwhile, was nowhere to be seen. But Claire wasn't finished. Not yet. Because the evidence hadn't just shown misconduct. It showed federal crimes, financial misappropriation, bribes, obstruction of justice, patterns so large, so systematic, that even seasoned journalists were stunned. Claire Bennett, the scholarship girl with hacked hair and iron focus, had made her declaration. This wasn't a tantrum, this wasn't revenge, this was a war, and the first strike had landed. The day after Claire's confrontation with Trevor in chemistry class, the storm was no longer confined to Hawthorne Academy's marble halls. It had broken through the gates and surged into the outside world. The video from room 204 was now everywhere, not just on TikTok, but dissected by legal analysts on morning news shows, played on loop across cable segments, and reposted by influencers, educators, and advocacy groups alike. Claire Bennett had become a symbol, but symbols don't win battles. Evidence does. And the most damning piece of evidence in Claire's arsenal had yet to see the light of day. She hadn't told anyone, not her mother, not even her attorney Elna Chen, about the meeting with Vivian Carr. Not yet. Some things needed silence before they could be weaponized. That evening, as the sky turned the color of bruised steel and the wind sharpened against the windows, Claire sat at the kitchen table across from her mother, the flash drive resting between them like a live grenade. "Where did you get this?" her mother, Angela, asked. Her hands were still stained with ink from patient charts, her scrubs wrinkled from a double shift. "From Blake Carr's mom, yesterday. She pulled up in a Cadillac and handed it to me like it was a birthday gift." Angela raised a skeptical brow. "You're telling me a woman whose son helped plan your assault just gave you a flash drive full of evidence?" Claire nodded. "She said she's done protecting monsters. Said her daughter tried to kill herself last year. The school covered it up. Sent her to some retreat in Switzerland, called it mental health enrichment. But it was really about silence." Angela's face hardened. Claire slid the flash drive into her laptop's port. The folder tree loaded instantly. No encryption, no password, just a cold, clinical index of ruin. Labeled years, color-coded tags, and timestamps going back nearly 2 decades. For the next 4 hours, they went file by file. The first folder was labeled Financials, Off Record. Angela scrolled through rows of spreadsheets. Each sheet detailed 6-figure donations that curiously coincided with the disappearance of misconduct reports. Claire cross-referenced dates and names. They matched. Student complaints vanished from records within 48 hours of these payments. The second folder was worse. Academic manipulation. Emails from administrators requesting grade changes for legacy students. Screenshots of internal messages saying things like, "Bennett's performance makes other students look bad. Recommend quiet penalty. Delay transcripts. Reduce recommendation strength." Claire clenched her fists. She'd suspected sabotage. Now she had proof. But it was the third folder that made Angela cover her mouth with both hands. Medical overrides. Dozens of entries. Diagnostic records showing how scholarship students were disproportionately flagged for ADHD and anxiety. Reports of overmedication. Prescriptions pushed by school consultants with ties to pharmaceutical firms. Some of those same firms owned by families on the board. Angela scrolled through medical charts, seeing familiar names of students she'd treated in the ER. Students who had been brought in with side effects, adverse reactions, overdoses. She'd always assumed it was poor regulation. She never imagined it was intentional. "They're drugging kids," she whispered. "To make them compliant. To make them quiet." Claire didn't speak. Her anger was steady now, no longer sharp, just deep, anchored, weaponized. But then they found the fourth folder. Incidents reclassified. It read like a graveyard. Ashley Chen, 16th, sexual assault filed. Reclassified as inappropriate behavior, mutual, case closed. Marcus Washington, 17. Broken arm from a football hazing incident. Reclassified as sports-related injury, no foul play, no follow-up. Grace Morales, 14. Expelled after reporting a teacher's harassment. Her family was offered a reputation protection stipend to remain silent. Each entry included emails, administrative discussions, legal advice, payout agreements. And sprinkled throughout the correspondence were names Claire recognized. Dr. Judith Monroe, Jonathan Hartwell, legal counsel. Richard Langford, Trevor's father. At the heart of it all, a system that didn't just tolerate abuse, it protected it, preserved it, and paid to keep it silent. Angela stood up abruptly, pacing the kitchen. "We have to go to the police, the press, the Department of Education. Not yet," Claire interrupted. "If we don't move smart, they'll spin it. They'll say it's fake, or stolen, or misinterpreted." Angela rubbed her eyes. "Then what's your move?" Claire opened a document on her desktop. Strategic Release Plan, Phase 1. She had already prepared it. Timeline, recipients, press contacts, legal avenues, chain of custody backups, cloud storage across multiple platforms. She had even written an op-ed titled "The Cost of Silence: What They Tried to Hide at Hawthorne Academy." Angela looked at her daughter, the quiet girl who used to line her notebooks with diagrams and flowcharts, and saw someone who had turned her intellect into an instrument of justice. "You've had this planned for a while. I've been preparing since the first time they made me feel small." At 10:37 p.m., Claire sent a single encrypted link to Elena Chen. Subject line, "It's time." She included a note. "This goes beyond Title IX. What I've attached includes evidence of criminal conspiracy, financial fraud, and medical abuse. You'll find direct ties to board members and donors. I'm ready to go public. Are you?" Elena responded within 15 minutes. "Understood. I'll notify federal contacts tonight. Begin the formal briefings in the morning. This is going to get loud. Be ready." Claire was ready, but someone else had been watching. At 11:52 p.m., a message came through from an unknown number. "You should have taken the deal. This isn't over." She didn't flinch. She screenshotted it and added it to her evidence archive. 30 minutes later, another text. "St. Mary's Hospital. Garage Level B. Accidents happen after dark." Claire froze. Angela leaned over, read the text, and didn't hesitate. She picked up her phone and called hospital security. "My name is Angela Bennett. I'm an RN in trauma. I'm being threatened. Someone may be targeting me on site. I want surveillance in that garage. Tonight." Then she turned to her daughter. "They want to scare us into silence." Claire looked at the flash drive still sitting beside her laptop. "They're going to learn that some things can't be scared away." The next morning, as the fog lifted over the city, Claire received a call from Elena. "They've filed the documents with the DOJ and Department of Education. We're officially in federal territory. This will be investigated as a civil rights and criminal matter. But there's one more thing you should know." "What?" "I've received confirmation that multiple administrators are preparing to delete files, wipe records, and stall. You need to move now." Claire didn't go to school that day. She went to the New Haven Tribune. She walked through the front door with a backpack, a flash drive, and the quiet determination of a girl who had already lost too much to be afraid. The editor, a wiry woman named Joanna Pike, greeted her with a firm handshake. "Miss Bennett," she said, gesturing toward the small conference room, "let's hear your story." Claire sat down, opened her laptop, and began. By the following day, the New Haven Tribune ran its front-page headline, "Student Whistleblower Exposes Years of Abuse at Elite Academy. 15 years of scandal protected by power. A young woman refuses to stay silent." National outlets picked it up within hours. CNN, the New York Times, NPR, local stations, podcasts, bloggers, civil rights groups, pediatric health watchdogs, everyone. Claire's op-ed, "The Cost of Silence," was published by dawn. It went viral before lunch. She hadn't planned to become a face for a movement. She just wanted justice. But movements are often born from a single act of clarity, and Claire had delivered hers with the weight of undeniable proof. By the time Claire Bennett stepped off the public bus that Friday morning, she was no longer just a student. She was a whistleblower, a headline, a target. The pavement outside Hawthorne Academy buzzed with reporters, camera crews, and security guards who now flanked the wrought iron gates like soldiers at a palace. The school that had once quietly buried its scandals behind mahogany doors was now the centerpiece of a national reckoning. Claire walked past the chaos with practiced stillness. She wore the same gray coat she always had, patched at the elbows, thrifted years ago, but today it felt like armor. Inside her backpack, nestled between folders and textbooks, were 5 USB drives containing duplicates of everything she'd uncovered: embezzlement records, medication abuse data, doctored academic transcripts, and over 3 dozen cover-up correspondences implicating key board members. The original drive, the one Vivian Carr had handed her in the Escalade, was now locked in a secure off-site box in downtown Hartford. Claire wasn't taking any chances. She had just reached her locker when her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "You don't belong here." Claire stared at the screen. Her thumb hovered for a second, then calmly tapped the screenshot button. She dropped it into a folder titled Threat Documentation, then forwarded it to her lawyer. It was the third anonymous message that morning. The first had arrived at 5:14 a.m., just as dawn broke over the rooftops. Unknown number. "Withdraw your claims or your scholarship's gone." 15 minutes later. Unknown number. "Your mother works alone on nights, doesn't she?" By 6 a.m., Elena Chen, her civil rights attorney, had been looped in, along with a small digital security team that volunteered to help after Claire's story went viral. They were tracking the IP addresses. Some came from spoofed foreign servers, but one pinged from Hawthorne Academy's own internal network. Claire didn't flinch. Instead, she launched her next strike. She sent a formal email to the school board and administration, copying media outlets and the Department of Education. Attached were 5 screenshots of threatening texts, redacted only to protect the innocent, and a single-line message: "If your goal is to intimidate me, you're going to have to do better. See you in chemistry." Inside room 204, the energy was tense. Mrs. Ramirez gave Claire a brief, shaky nod. Students parted to make space for her, some out of respect, others out of fear. Trevor Langford wasn't there. Neither was Blake or Derek. Emma Hastings sat in the far corner, head down, her phone face down beside her like it was radioactive. Class hadn't even started when the fire alarm suddenly blared. A voice crackled over the PA system: "All students evacuate immediately. This is not a drill." Confused murmurs rose as students filed out. Claire stood still. She knew a diversion when she saw one. So did Mrs. Ramirez. "Claire," she said quietly, "stay with me." They moved to the hallway together, the shrill alarm echoing around them. At the far end, Claire spotted 2 men in dark suits entering through a side door, one of whom she recognized from the school's website. Jonathan Hartwell, chief legal counsel, the same man who tried to offer her a full ride and hush money. He made eye contact, then quickly looked away. Claire followed protocol and exited with the rest of the students. But when she reached the courtyard, she pulled out her phone and began recording. She panned from the front gate, where a black SUV idled with tinted windows, to the building entrance where Hartwell was conferring with the principal and 2 unknown men. They were holding briefcases. One had a tablet. She caught a glimpse of a document on the screen. Emergency expulsion proceedings. Claire's chest tightened. They weren't just threatening her now, they were preparing to erase her. That night, while her mother worked a double shift in trauma, Claire stayed home, glued to her laptop. Emails poured in, some supportive, some hateful, some anonymous and vile, but one email subject line made her stomach drop. Urgent, hospital employment status. It was from the St. Mary's Human Resources Department, addressed to her mother. Claire opened it. The language was polished but unmistakable. Due to increased media attention and reputational concerns, the hospital is conducting an internal review of staff social media activity and outside affiliations. Nurse Angela Bennett may be temporarily reassigned during this process. Claire sat in silence. They were going after her mother's job. The same hospital where Angela had worked for 17 years. The same hospital whose cardiac wing bore the name Langford Family Pavilion, after a multi-million-dollar donation from Richard Langford, Trevor's father. Claire's hands trembled. She inhaled, exhaled, and picked up her phone. "Mom," she said as soon as Angela answered. "I just saw it," Angela replied. Her voice was flat, controlled, but Claire heard the tremor beneath. "I'll fix this," Claire said. Angela paused, then, "I don't regret anything. But be smart, baby. Be strategic. These people, they don't fight fair." "I know," Claire whispered, "but they're going to learn that neither do I." At 9:03 p.m., the doorbell rang. Claire froze. She peeked through the peephole. It was Hartwell, alone, holding a thick envelope. She didn't open the door. He leaned in toward the peephole and spoke. "Claire, we don't want this to escalate. You're a smart girl. You've made your point. Now let's talk like adults." Claire pressed record on her phone and stayed silent. Hartwell shifted his weight. "Inside this envelope is an offer. Full tuition to any university, housing stipend, future job placement, and a letter of recommendation from the Langford Foundation. All you have to do is issue a short public statement. Say the incident was misunderstood. Say it's resolved. No one needs to lose anything else." Claire remained still. "Your mother's job," Hartwell added, lowering his voice, "is very secure, if this ends here." She spoke at last. Her voice was clear, even through the door. "I've already sent the full file to 3 federal agencies, Hartwell, and I have your voice on record threatening me. Step off my property before I add trespassing to the list." There was a beat of silence, then retreating footsteps. Claire waited 5 more minutes before unlocking the door, retrieving the envelope, and carefully photographing its contents. A contract written in legal jargon, but crystal clear in intent. Hush money, cloaked in civility. She scanned it, uploaded it to her threat documentation folder, and sent copies to Elena Chen and her media contacts. 10 minutes later, she got a text from the New York Times reporter she'd been working with. "This is coercion. We'll print it. Front page." Claire let herself cry then, not from fear, not from defeat, but from the overwhelming weight of fighting giants and still standing. At midnight, Elena called. "Claire, it's going to get worse before it gets better." "I know. There's an emergency board meeting tomorrow morning. They're going to try to expel you. Grounds, creating a hostile learning environment, inciting defamation. Let them try. You need legal representation in the room. I've reached out to someone." "Who?" "A civil rights attorney. Alexandra Shen, sister of Ashley Chen. She's agreed to fly in. She'll be there by 7 a.m. Claire closed her eyes. That name, Ashley Chen, the girl whose case Hawthorne buried 3 years ago. The girl Claire had read about in the Incidents Reclassified folder. It was all coming full circle. Claire barely slept. At dawn, she stood in front of the bathroom mirror, scissors in hand. This time, there was no trembling, no hesitation. She trimmed the remains of her hair into a sharp, even bob, a line in the sand. They had tried to humiliate her with scissors. Now she was using them to prepare for war. The doors to the Hawthorne Academy boardroom were 2 inches of carved mahogany, heavy, polished, and meant to intimidate. Claire Bennett stared at them for a moment before stepping inside, flanked by 2 women whose presence said everything before a word was spoken. To her right was her mother, Angela Bennett, dressed in the same courtroom-ready navy suit she had worn 5 years ago when testifying about patient negligence at St. Mary's Hospital. Her jaw was tight, her stride deliberate. To Claire's left walked Alexandra Shen, civil rights attorney, Yale law graduate and older sister of Ashley Chen, the student Hawthorne had silenced 3 years earlier. Alexandra's black pantsuit was sharply tailored, her heels echoing against the marble like a drumbeat. In one hand she carried a briefcase, in the other a file marked Exhibit SETA through G. They weren't here to plead, they were here to prosecute. The boardroom, as expected, was a temple to old money. Oil portraits of dead donors loomed from gilded frames. The conference table was easily 15 feet long, its lacquered surface pristine, save for the notepads, water pitchers, and anxious fingers tapping in syncopation. Claire counted the figures seated behind the table. 7 board members, all impeccably dressed, all looking as if they'd been carved from the same cold marble. At the head sat Richard Langford, patriarch of the Langford family and CEO of Langford Industries. His resemblance to his son, Trevor, was unmistakable. The same ice-blue eyes, the same square jaw, the same smirk that didn't quite reach the eyes. To his right sat Dr. Judith Monroe, the headmaster. Her expression was neutral, but the taut line of her lips betrayed discomfort. And next to her, Jonathan Hartwell, legal counsel, the man who'd stood outside Claire's apartment less than 12 hours ago with a bribe in his hand and threats on his tongue. The room fell into a tense hush as Claire entered. Dr. Monroe cleared her throat. Miss Bennett, we're here to address serious concerns regarding your recent behavior and the disruption it has caused to our academic environment. Before Claire could respond, Alexandra stepped forward. With all due respect, Dr. Monroe, she said, voice cutting but calm, we are here to address your behavior and the systemic pattern of civil rights violations, criminal negligence, and financial misconduct that my client has brought to light. The room stirred. Hartwell leaned forward, his voice tight. Miss Shen, this is an internal disciplinary hearing. Your presence here is a courtesy, not a right. Incorrect, Alexandra replied, smiling faintly. Under Title IX, any student accused or accusing another of conduct violations is entitled to legal representation. Given that your institution receives federal funding, we're well within our rights to proceed. Richard Langford slammed his hand against the table, startling several members. This isn't a courtroom, Ms. Shen. No, Alexandra agreed, but if you'd like it to become one, we're ready. Claire remained silent through it all, not because she had nothing to say, but because she was saving it. Dr. Monroe attempted to retake control. Miss Bennett, we've received complaints that your actions, particularly the publication of confidential school information, have created a hostile learning environment and incited public defamation against this institution. Claire finally spoke. What you call confidential, the federal government now calls evidence. The documents, emails, and data I've submitted have already been shared with the Department of Justice, the Department of Education, and the IRS. Another board member, an older man with a deep tan and a Rolex the size of a drink coaster, scoffed. You expect us to believe that a high school student single-handedly exposed one of the most respected academies in the Northeast? Alexandra opened her briefcase. Let's walk through it, shall we? She removed a small projector and powered it on. The first image flashed across the opposite wall, a group chat screenshot. Exhibit A, a conversation between Trevor Langford, Blake Carr, Emma Hastings, and Derek Zhao discussing how to put the scholarship girl in her place. They debated between cutting her hair and destroying her laptop. They chose hair because, quote, her computer probably has tracking software since she's poor. Richard Langford's face went white. Exhibit B, Alexandra continued, shifting slides, is a video posted by Emma Hastings to her private Instagram story, which has since been screen recorded and authenticated by our forensic team. It shows Trevor assaulting Claire Bennett during a history class. In the background, a teacher, Mr. Whitaker, fails to intervene. The room was silent but for the hum of the projector. Exhibit C, a spreadsheet. Hawthorne Academy's disciplinary records over the past 10 years. We've color-coded them by family income. Note how punishment severity correlates inversely with donor size. In other words, the more a family gives, the less their child suffers consequences, regardless of the offense. By now, several board members were visibly sweating. Claire turned toward the wall of oil paintings and looked into the blank eyes of the men who had built this place, or perhaps buried it under legacy and silence. She stood. There's more. She pulled out her phone and tapped the screen. The audio file she'd prepared began to play. Trevor's voice filled the room, smug and unmistakable. "Yeah, we're going to cut that bitch's hair tomorrow. Put her in her place. My dad says she needs to learn that scholarship kids should be grateful, not uppity." Another voice. "Blake Carr? Make sure someone films it. We can edit it later. Make it look like she asked for it." Emma Hastings. "If she complains, we just say she's unstable. Mental health issues. Who's going to believe trailer trash over us?" The board sat in stunned silence. But Claire wasn't done. She hit play on a second file. Dr. Monroe's voice. "The Johnson family is becoming a problem. They have evidence of the assault. We need to handle this like we did with the Martinez situation." Richard Langford responded. "I'll make some calls. By next month, they won't be able to afford groceries, let alone lawyers." Hartwell's pen clattered to the floor. Alexandra addressed the board, her voice colder now. "Every person in this room has a choice. Resign immediately and cooperate with federal investigators, or be named as co-conspirators in a civil and criminal case that includes RICO statute violations." Richard Langford stood. "You think you've won?" he growled. "You have no idea what I'm capable of. I built this school." "No," Claire interrupted. "You bought it, and you used it to protect predators and silence victims. What I've done, it's not revenge, it's justice." At that moment, the doors to the boardroom swung open. A man stepped inside, flashing a badge. "I'm Agent Martinez, FBI. Please step away from the table." The silence shattered into chaos. Agents entered in a line, calm, professional, and unstoppable. Within minutes, Richard Langford was in handcuffs. Dr. Monroe was escorted out pale and speechless. Hartwell made a run for it, only to be caught outside, frantically shredding documents in the back seat of his car. Claire stood still, watching it all, no smile, no celebration, just clarity. The machine had begun to fall, and she had pushed the first domino. 3 hours later, sitting outside the boardroom with Alexandra and her mother, Claire finally allowed herself to exhale. Angela squeezed her hand. "You did it, baby." Claire shook her head slowly. "This is just the beginning." Alexandra looked up from her phone. "DOJ is preparing a full investigation. You've changed the conversation, and the system's going to have to answer for it." Claire's phone buzzed. It was a message from someone she didn't recognize, a girl in California. "I saw your story. Something similar happened at my school. Can you help me?" Claire looked up, eyes fierce, voice steady. "Yeah," she said, "I can. The fall of Hawthorne Academy didn't happen with a bang. It didn't burn down in flames or collapse in one cataclysmic day. No, it fell like a crumbling statue, piece by piece, as the rot beneath its marble surface was exposed for the world to see. And Claire Bennett was the one holding the chisel. It began within 24 hours of the boardroom raid. By the next morning, major news outlets had moved their mobile broadcasting vans directly outside the school gates. Helicopter footage aired live on national television as FBI agents carried out computers, file boxes and hard drives from the administrative offices. Dr. Judith Monroe, once hailed as a visionary educator, was led out in a long tan coat, her wrists cuffed in front of her and her eyes hidden behind oversized sunglasses. The headline on the New York Times front page read, "Elite School Faces. Federal Probe After Whistleblower Reveals 15-Year Cover-Up." A subheading added student Claire Bennett, called "The Spark That Lit the Fire." Inside Hawthorne's corridors, students watched from behind their lockers, stunned into silence. Faculty whispered in huddles. The head janitor, Mr. Alvarez, had to pry a Langford Foundation plaque off the library wall before agents entered to scan the server room. For the first time in decades, the walls of power were echoing with the footsteps of justice. Claire, meanwhile, had been excused from classes, not out of punishment, but because the media frenzy made it impossible for her to walk 10 steps without someone asking for a quote, a photo, or a reaction. Instead, she remained at home, coordinating with lawyers, investigators, and advocacy groups, all while finishing her college applications in the tiny corner of their apartment that doubled as a study nook. Alexandra Shen had taken temporary leave from her firm to help manage the civil litigation and assist federal prosecutors. She told Claire frankly, "They're throwing everything they've got into damage control, but the ship's going down. They just don't know how deep the water is yet." The water was deeper than anyone imagined. Within a week, the New Haven Tribune published an exposé detailing how Hawthorne's leadership had buried over 40 documented abuse complaints in exchange for donations, favors, or career advancement. Several whistleblowers came forward, emboldened by Claire's courage. Teachers who had been pushed out for trying to report misconduct. Alumni who had accepted hush money and now wanted to return it. Even a former trustee, anonymous but credible, who admitted the school had falsified expulsion records to protect legacy students. Federal subpoenas followed swiftly. Langford Industries, Carr Pharmaceuticals, and multiple private equity firms with financial ties to Hawthorne found themselves dragged into the spotlight, and the dominoes began to fall. The first was Trevor Langford, arrested not only for the assault on Claire, but for a pattern of documented harassment, including incidents where he allegedly drugged female students at parties, vandalized scholarship students' property, and pressured staff into altering grades. His court hearing was short and devastating. Claire didn't attend the sentencing, but she received an email from the prosecutor's office the next day. Defendant sentenced to 18 months in juvenile detention, 3 years probation, barred from enrollment at any federally funded academic institution. Trevor's smirk, once his trademark, had evaporated entirely. His family, once untouchable, was next. Richard Langford, arrested during the boardroom hearing, was indicted on 5 felony counts: obstruction of justice, tax evasion, bribery, wire fraud, and conspiracy. The Langford Foundation's assets were frozen, pending a full audit. Their name was scrubbed from the hospital's cardiac wing within a week. Claire's mother, Angela, stood in the lobby that morning, watching as maintenance workers carefully removed the gilded Langford Pavilion letters from the entrance wall. She snapped a photo and sent it to Claire with a single caption, "One brick at a time." Dr. Judith Monroe accepted a plea deal, avoiding prison in exchange for full cooperation with federal investigators. Her statement, though carefully worded, was a quiet admission of guilt. "I lost sight of my purpose," she said. "I protected the institution over the individuals who entrusted me with their safety, and I will carry that failure the rest of my life." 3 other board members were indicted, including the former head of student discipline and the school's longtime CFO, whose offshore accounts were traced back to unauthorized donation redirection schemes. The school itself, Hawthorne Academy, faced a reckoning beyond legal penalties. By January, the state announced that the institution's charter had been revoked. The private accreditation board followed, citing systemic ethical failure, criminal conduct, and educational malpractice. Parents pulled their students in droves. The campus went quiet. Applications plummeted. And after nearly 130 years, Hawthorne Academy ceased operations. Its buildings were slated for liquidation. Its endowment, once topping $130 million, was repurposed under court order to fund restitution for victims and create scholarships for underprivileged students across Connecticut. Claire's role shifted from whistleblower to reformer. She met with Department of Education officials, offered testimony to a House subcommittee, and helped draft preliminary guidelines for what would later be called the Bennett Protocol, a federal initiative requiring independent oversight for any private school receiving public funds. When she was invited to speak at a press conference alongside Senator Patricia Rowland, the senator introduced her with reverence. Claire Bennett did not burn down a school. She illuminated the truth. And once that truth was seen, the institution collapsed under the weight of its own secrets. Claire's remarks were brief but powerful. "I didn't do this alone," she said. "I had my mother, my attorney, my truth, and I had my documentation. We're taught to believe power protects itself. But power only survives if we agree to stay silent. I didn't, and I won't." Not everyone who once opposed her remained on the wrong side. Vivian Carr, who had first delivered the flash drive, became an unlikely ally. She provided additional evidence, testified against her own husband, and used her influence to help dismantle the toxic culture she once helped create. Her son, Blake, issued a public apology. He didn't excuse his behavior. He didn't minimize his guilt. "I thought being born into power meant I had it," he said at a restorative justice forum. "Claire taught me what real power looks like, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the forgiveness I may never earn." Even Emma Hastings, now suspended from her university for her role in the group chat, posted a video acknowledging her actions. It didn't erase the harm, but it mattered. And perhaps, more than anything else, it showed that change, real cultural change, had begun. Claire was accepted to Harvard on a full scholarship. Her essay, titled "The Price of Silence," was cited by the admissions committee as among the most compelling we have ever received. She chose to major in political science with a focus on education policy. At her high school graduation, held in a rented auditorium because Hawthorne was gone, Claire gave the valedictorian speech. She stood before a crowd of students, teachers, alumni, and reporters, her short bob now grown past her shoulders, but still parted the same way, as a reminder. "They tried to cut me down," she said. "Not just my hair, but my dignity, my future, my voice. They tried to make me small. But I learned that justice isn't about volume, it's about persistence. It's about standing up even when you're afraid, especially when you're afraid." Her mother cried openly in the front row, no longer wearing scrubs, but a deep green dress she'd bought with her first paycheck as the new director of nursing ethics at Boston General. Alexandra Shen, now heading a national task force on educational misconduct, sent Claire a bouquet and a handwritten note. "You did more than take on a school. You changed a system." Claire Bennett never asked to be a symbol. She didn't seek the spotlight. But as she walked out of the auditorium that June afternoon, diploma in hand, she passed a mural on the side of a community center. A girl with red hair, standing in front of a collapsing stone wall, holding a book in one hand and a broken pair of scissors in the other. At the bottom it read, "Silence is not safety. Truth is power." Claire smiled. The ivory tower had fallen, and in its place something honest was finally starting to rise. 2 years after Hawthorne Academy fell, Claire Bennett walked across the graduation stage at Harvard University. The spring air in Cambridge was sharp and clean, the sky above a pale, cloudless blue. Her robe was crimson, her steps steady, and in her hand she held a diploma in political science, with honors. The moment felt both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary in that hundreds of students were graduating beside her. Extraordinary because no one else on that stage had taken down a billion-dollar institution with a flash drive and unflinching truth. In the crowd, her mother stood tall in a tailored navy suit, a stark contrast from the hospital scrubs she once wore to every school function. Now, Director of Nursing Ethics at Boston General, Angela Bennett had climbed her own mountain, one forged through back-to-back shifts, whispered threats, and sacrifices no one ever applauded. When Claire's name was called, she clapped the loudest. The Hawthorne scandal was still rippling across the country. Since the investigation broke, 5 elite private schools had come under federal review. 3 superintendents had resigned. One state passed legislation mandating third-party oversight for disciplinary procedures in all private institutions receiving public funds. The movement even had a name, Number Cut the Silence, a nod to the haircut that had started it all. But the greatest transformation wasn't found in laws or headlines. It was in the quiet, seismic shift happening in classrooms and boardrooms alike. Young people, especially those who had once been told they didn't belong, were speaking up, documenting, reporting, fighting back. Not with violence, but with courage, strategy, and receipts. Claire had helped write the playbook. She spent the months after graduation fielding offers, law schools and advocacy groups, government fellowships. But she turned them down, at least for now. Instead, she accepted a role at the U.S. Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, where she would investigate the very kinds of abuses she had lived through. She would read the reports from other students, some as young as 12, and she would believe them, advocate for them, protect them. Because once, no one had done that for her. Her name had become a symbol, yes, but she remained grounded in the reality that real change doesn't come from going viral. It comes from doing the work. And she was just getting started. That summer, Claire received a letter, handwritten, mailed to the department's D.C. office with no return address. Inside was a short note. They tried to cut you down, and you became sharper. I'm one of the students who saw you stand up when everyone else stayed silent. I was in the back of that chemistry class. You didn't just save yourself. You saved people you'll never even meet. Thank you. Claire folded the note carefully, tucked it into a drawer beside her ID badge and government-issued laptop. The scissors they used against her had once symbolized cruelty. Now they were a reminder, not of pain, but of purpose. She sometimes wore her hair in that same bob now, not because she had to, but because she chose to. It was no longer a mark of violation. It was a badge of survival, a blade turned into a torch. People still asked her how she stayed calm, how she didn't break, how an 18-year-old girl from a 2-bedroom apartment managed to outsmart the architects of a system designed to crush her. Her answer was always the same. I didn't do it alone. Behind every moment of courage stood 1,000 unseen ones. Her mother patching her shoes with duct tape when they couldn't afford new ones. Her teacher, Mrs. Ramirez, who said nothing but moved her seating chart in silent protest. Vivian Carr, the mother who finally chose truth over family loyalty. And Alexandra Shen, the lawyer who turned her sister's pain into a mission. Justice, Claire knew, was never about a single hero. It was about choosing, again and again, to do the right thing when no one's watching. She hadn't set out to change the world. She just refused to let it break her. And in the process, she'd helped rebuild something better, not just for herself, but for every student who'd ever been told to stay quiet and be grateful. The ivory tower had fallen, but from its ruins a new foundation had been laid, one built on truth, resilience, and a quiet girl who decided that scissors would never define her story again. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think, don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel. We share powerful stories that expose injustice, celebrate courage, and remind us all that change begins with one voice. What would you do if you were in Claire's shoes? Let's talk about it in the comments. And remember, someone out there needs to hear your story too. Don't let it go unheard.